Hey everybody, it's Chris and Rick Talk Guitars, and today we're going to talk about Wayne Kramer. He died not too long ago. He was the guitar player for the MC5, one of the founding members of that band, and we being guitarists want to pay homage to our fellow guitar players out there, and especially when they pass on, and especially somebody like Wayne Kramer, who was pretty important to, I would say, the punk scene as it developed as an inspiration and kind of
rock and roll in general.
yeah, and rock and roll in general. Yeah, for sure. And so, we thought it'd be fun to just pay homage to him and talk about, I kind of had an angle where I did a bunch of research and just really got into the MC5, hearing about his passing. And the one thing that struck me was, he, like other artists or bands, like kind of like the Ramones or the Stooges, kind of were these inspirations really for generations of musicians. They didn't necessarily maybe gain the fame they had hoped or the wealth they'd hoped, but in the end, they proved to be very inspirational for a lot of other musicians. And I thought would be interesting to talk about that. What do you think about that, Chris?
Oh, I totally agree with that. I mean, people that probably don't even know who he is are influenced by him, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because he himself and his guitar brother, Fred Smith, were both very influenced by Chuck Berry, who, I don't want to make sure we give enough time to Wayne Kramer, but I mean, I was thinking about that when I was thinking about this, just what Chuck Berry is to the guitar. It's like and how many people's story. And I kind of think that Chuck Berry is to the guitar what the Beatles are to pop music and modern, rock and roll. And that's only one aspect of him too, because Chuck Berry's songwriting was another thing that I don't want to go down that road, but I just wanted to say that they are like the next generation, that they've influenced a bunch of people, and people may not even know it so much what they're referencing when they're actually referencing those dudes, because they were, so seminal in that time period.
Yeah, but I think the Chuck Berry tie-in is totally applicable here, and I think he is foundational for so many guitar players of that generation, and like you and me, who came later in the line of guitar players. That's all in our DNA too, from the people we were influenced by and inspired by. So I think it's an applicable tie-in for sure.
It's kind of a shame because I have all their music on CDs, but I haven't had a CD player for like 15 years. And I don't have any of them on vinyl, and that's pretty much all I've been listening to lately. So when I was re-listening and kind of, revisiting upon his passing, I just kind of realized I got to get their music back into my life because it's been a long time.
Yeah.
And a while back, my band did the American Ruse song, and that was kind of like lit another thing. Like I gotta spend more time with these people, but I have not, and it's kind of a shame. So, kind of looking into this the past like week or so when we started talking about this was kind of really lit another fire under my ass to say, like, I got to get me some of them. I mean, there's always Spotify, but it's like kind of soul crushing. I mean, those records don't sound that great really, but on Spotify, it's even worse. I mean, it's like, but I definitely need to get some back in my life.
Yeah, me too. And I think I have their stuff on random formats too. But yeah, I mean, I'd like to just talk a little bit more about that because I saw interviews with him, and one interview in particular, he was talking about kind of I think it was with Terry Gross. He was on Fresh Air like many years ago. But he was saying kind of like how he carried all that baggage with him, like kind of the resentment of some of his peers that kind of, got famous and rich or, kind of surpassed him in terms of being in a band or a musician. And he was pretty candid about it, the baggage among other things, right? But the implosion of the band itself, and then just kind of all the trials and tribulations he encountered as a result of not having that band and kind of not living up to, what he'd hoped his future
incarceration.
Yeah, exactly, dude. That'll put a damper on things.
Totally. Yeah, it's interesting. Everything that I found recently since his passing that I've read about, I think, and that's kind of stands to reason. I mean, he's just, to me, just seems like such a proponent of the guitar as a life-changing thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, I've said this a lot, that it's not a thing. You get all caught up in this, the guitar, it's a hobby, it's a sport. We get some accessories for our guitar, pickups, amps, all this stuff. And he didn't really give a shit. He happened to play some cool gear. He didn't give a shit about that. It was the music and what the guitar was capable of. And, the kind of things he did in his life, like what was that thing he did with incarceration and guitars for
Jail
jail.
guitar doors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, him and
Yep.
Billy Bragg. We should all aspire in guitar culture to see that it's way, way beyond just stuff, because we're just inundated with stuff all the time and like shootouts and all this shit. And in the end, it's like, why do we do this after, how many million years of playing the guitar? Because it is more than a hobby. It is more than a sport. He was the person that struck me instantly, that lived his entire life around the guitar. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
I was really impressed and, kind of in awe of that about him.
Yeah, and that's a great point because again, he talked about like first hearing the guitar. His reaction was visceral to that sound, right? He felt it in his body. This loud electric guitar. And to your point, yeah, exactly. It was much more than the physical items like a guitar and an amp and stuff. He felt it in his bones, like, and that's how he approached it too. And hearing him talk, just the MC5 wanted to convey that to the audience, right? That energy. It wasn't about just the music, or they wanted to somehow transmit this energy to the audience. And that's why the show was so, energetic. I mean, and he was insane. I loved watching him. Like, I love that footage of MC5. And he's kind of like James Brown. Like, he's playing guitar and he's like shuffling around the stage and shimmying around the stage and just putting on a show. But I was really impressed with him too as a guitar player, not just as a guitar player, but just his whole philosophy about the guitar, about music. I mean, he was into free jazz. He was into all this cool stuff. And so he was, much more than just a guitar player in a hard rock band.
Right. And what you mentioned about, you can even see on some of these really horribly recorded YouTube clips how much of a force of nature that band was. It was them, it was the guitars, but it was everybody, their whole thing. It wasn't even like a rock show. It was more like, like testifying at church or like a political rally or something. It was just really powerful. And you could see it in the crowd, even in the most lowest quality clips. You can hear that totally sternum banging, mid-range throaty guitar that just, I don't know. I've never really gotten to play at those decibels, but you can just hear it. And they were like super old school. Every one of them super old school performers too. It was like you were saying, like James Brown or something. They were just really about the show and the look, the banners and all that stuff. So it was something that I just wish I would have had a chance to see, at some time. But they were gone by the time I was even like able to go to any shows. But yeah, it was pretty phenomenal. Like I said, a force of nature that band is. And it's, and I know anybody that's ever seen him has said that was like life-changing like show.
Yeah. Well, you being from their neck of the woods, essentially, was that kind of in your consciousness as a kid growing up and playing music? Was that?
No, I wasn't cool enough as a kid. I mean, I didn't. I mean, I was familiar with the term "kick out the jams, motherfucker," because people would say that a lot. I had no idea what that meant.
Interesting.
Until I was in my 20s or whatever, and I started like exploring other types of music. So I didn't really. I'd heard the name.
Yeah.
And now in retrospect, I guess when you get to be a certain age, you kind of start feeling your roots, and it's kind of like I'm kind of go back and look at your heritage. So him and Dick Wagner and Steve Hunter, other Michigan guitar players, those two I was into and didn't even know it. They were on all the records. I was listening to it. But now it's like definitely have a greater appreciation for, the Michigan sound, because there is a Michigan sound, what I mean? There's a Detroit sound, and, them and the Stooges, and they can definitely hear that. And watching some of that footage, collected from back then is just like, it kind of did remind me of home. I'd been to Detroit in the late 60s, once or something like that. Just, but I remember it as a child. I can remember it because it's kind of being terrifying and, kind of fascinating at the same time. So,
right. That's interesting. Yeah. They were a force of nature, and just listening to him talk in interviews and stuff, it was cool because there was thought behind how they presented the band. And like you were saying, I mean, they were very politically active in terms of, it was the 60s. They were kind of that generation that was really pushing back against the older generation. And he talked about that a lot. And that, they formed the White Panther Party because the Black Panthers said, hey, we need, some white folks to step up and be our counterparts. And they did that. And he talks about how initially it was kind of just not a joke, but kind of they weren't really taking it too seriously. They weren't all huddled in a room, planning, destruction or anything. But but they were very politically aware. And like you said, I mean, that translated into their shows too. I mean, I forget the guy's name that introduced them. It wasn't John Sinclair, but it was some other cat. But yeah, he would give that big fire and brimstone speech about, the revolution and are you going to be the problem or the solution? And
I
yeah.
saw John Sinclair read poetry in Lansing, Michigan,
Dude.
probably in 1980. Probably would have been like 87, 88, something like that. There was like 5 people in this coffee house and sitting there listening to him. And it was interesting listening to his poetry, but I was actually just thinking about, I just want to sit down and talk to him and talk about all the shit he's seen and went through.
Oh my
but
God.
I didn't get a chance to.
That would have been so cool, dude. Yeah, because I mean, he did 10 years for selling 2 joints to a federal agent or something.
That's such fucking bullshit.
It's totally, dude. It's insane. I thought about that. And I'm just like, that is so freaking insane. And yeah, but Billy Bragg started the Jail Guitar Doors program where they give inmates guitars and kind of try to get them focused on music instead of, harming each other and and doing all other. And Wayne Kramer was the kind of the American offshoot of that project. It's funny too because he was talking to Billy Bragg, and Billy Bragg was telling Wayne about the song by the Clash, and Billy Bragg didn't know that the song was about Wayne Kramer. And so Wayne's like, yeah, that's about me. I'm Wayne. That's me. And it was so cool because it was just like this epiphany, but yeah.
2 and 2. Oh.
Yeah. I can't say enough about the guy because I think he was cool. He was the real deal. He walked the walk. He saw all that shit. He made some bad choices and paid the price, and he knew it, but came out of it trying to do the right thing in so many ways. And so as a guitar player too, I mean, he's like any guitar player that watches that footage just has to be inspired because it's like he's just both the whole band, like you were saying, but Wayne to me was just like I just can't get over the fact that he was just such a cool, charismatic performer and just like exuding this energy that not only came through the guitar and the amp, but just him. Like he was just there were like lightning bolts coming off of that dude when he played live. It was so cool, and yeah, so. Yeah, I just thought it would be cool to talk about. And it's interesting because, in the music business, if you don't achieve what most people think is success, you're kind of, I don't know, maybe you as an artist, you probably go through a lot of emotional shit, like, oh man, because I vividly remember watching the Ramones documentary, End of the Century. And I was just so saddened by the fact that they all thought they were going to be, the answer to, or the torchbearers of rock and roll and be the next big thing. They thought they were going to be as big as the Stones, and they never achieved that. But later in their career, when they started talking to musicians, like young musicians, like the grunge guys and other people, they realized what an impact they made on these young musicians. And so likewise, Wayne Kramer was in a similar situation. And luckily later in life, I think he got to see from all these inspired musicians how much he had impacted their lives as musicians. And so I just think that's such a cool thing as an artist.
No, it really is. And that was something I often think the term that gets thrown around a lot, I just have a problem with that, underrated term, because first of all, the rating system is completely fucked, but I can understand not achieving the level of success where you're comfortable, financially or whatever. But as far as it's like all the right fucking people know about Wayne Kramer and to him, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a shame that not other people aren't, but it's like, I hope he realized that, he was, and I'm sure he did by who he hung out with, that he was loved by, and admired by so many other cool guitar players and, people in general. So,
yeah, because I think as an artist, whatever medium you're in, I think that's got to be gratifying. And, you go through all the emotional baggage as you're on your journey, but it's got to be gratifying, when you encounter people who are truly affected by, your career as a musician or a person. And it is, a combination of him as a musician and a person, I'm sure, that really impacted the lives of all these people. But I just think that's so cool. Because, I mean, ultimately, that's what you want. You want, the material stuff, we all think about it and but honestly, like if you're an artist and you really believe in your art and you're committed to it, the most gratifying thing I think you can have is to inspire people to go start a band or start painting or doing whatever. I think that's so cool. That's a cool legacy to have.
Yeah, and actually changed the course of music. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because
Yeah.
they did their little part. And I don't know. I mean, this is something that I know people who really care about this, and I can understand why. But the whole Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing, I don't know if they've ever made it in there. I mean, it's a shame if they haven't. But fuck that place. You know what I mean?
I think so
It's
too.
about commerce. And it's not about art. It's not about rock and roll. It's not about music or anything. So it's kind of unfortunate. But I was just genuinely curious. I'll have to look to see if they ever got, the MC5 ever made it. I know they've been nominated, but I don't know if they ever made it into.
I think, yeah, I'm not sure either. I do know I think they were nominated, but I don't know if they made it either. And I agree with you. I think that whole thing, again, because it speaks to what we talked about before in terms of the competitive nature of, or the competitive bullshit that people bring to art is just so unappealing, and these awards and these other things. I mean, if you're acknowledged by your peers, that's important, I think. But the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, all this other stuff, they're just corporate, manifestations of people wanting to. Yeah, again, I think it's just gatekeepers wanting to, have their little power trip over, whatever art they're involved with. So I feel the same way. I mean, I don't really know how he felt about it, about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or any of that other stuff, but I really appreciate artists that don't, it's hard not to, because I think a lot of times they think about their fans. And like, I remember Rush, they were so, their fans were so strong minded about wanting to see Rush in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that I think that was kind of what fueled them in terms of like, okay, well, yeah, our fans really dig this, so we might take more interest in it. But I don't,
Right.
But I'm sure Wayne Kramer and those guys seem like, the gritty kind of guys that probably wouldn't give a shit. It's like, I don't care ultimately. And especially a guy like Wayne Kramer, I think he was more thoughtful about his life. It's like, well, that'd be great, but I'm more focused on this program I'm doing with Jail Guitar Doors and political activism and all this other stuff. So that, cool if that happens, but I don't really give a shit.
Made me realize I got to read that book. I can't believe I haven't read his book. I read all of these rock books, but I haven't read his. I got to read
It's
that
on the list. Yeah, for
really
sure.
soon. But we have to take a moment or two after me saying all this stuff about how spiritual guitar is like talk about the gear.
Yeah,
They play some
we might as well.
shit.
Totally,
dude. Both him and Fred play some really cool shit. If you look, you'll see Wayne Kramer. He's got a Dan Armstrong, a black lucite guitar for a while. He had it looks like a Wilshire, an Epiphone Wilshire for a while. And then he had his Stratocaster. It was, I don't know the year of that. It must have been like a 67 or 68, maybe a 69. I don't know.
I think a late 60s. Yeah, for
It
sure.
was definitely late 60s, but I don't know if it was 67, 68, or 69. Something I learned just recently is I always assumed that Fred Smith's Rickenbacker was a solid body 6-string. It was a 12-string.
Oh, really?
Strung as a 6-string. But
I love that.
yeah, that was pretty cool. He made me want a solid body Rickenbacker. I mean, and I got to play one once for a show. This was back in Michigan. Someone lent me one to do a show, and I really liked it. It was kind of unique. It sounded better than the Strat I had, but more than anything, it just felt really good. And it just super comfortable. But
yeah, I'm glad we are talking about the gear, because that's another thing that stuck out to me too. I think he played a Junior too, maybe. Maybe it was the Wilshire I'm thinking of.
Esquire. Yeah, he played an Esquire too.
Yeah, the Esquire. And then, of course, the Marshall Stacks. I mean, and the cool thing about their first album is it's live. It's a live album. That was another thing that was unique about that band. It's like, we're putting out a live album as our first album. And it sounds, I mean, like you said, I mean, sonically, but I mean, they captured the sound of that.
Yeah, they did.
They captured the energy of that thing, which is the best thing you can do, because so many live albums, I think, sometimes they don't capture the energy that is being conveyed by the band and the audience, which is super important. But man, they really did on that album, and it's so cool. And I revisited all those albums before our talk, and they're just cool. It's garage rock, punk, proto punk, really. I mean, it's just rock. I just rock.
Yeah, that's just rock and roll, like
good stuff. Yeah, rock and roll. And like you said, I mean, Chuck Berry was a huge influence on him. Free jazz. He was into jazz, like all those
No,
guys.
you can totally hear. I mean,
Yeah.
definitely his approach to it a lot. There's a lot of that element
Yeah.
to it, which is super cool. And the Stooges too kind of took that thing a little bit
Yeah.
too, and ran with it a little time later. But
Yeah.
no, I love that aspect about it. It's like there's something that just draws me in with that whole like era and the decibel, the great
Yes.
decibel level, pure rock and roll.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, that's the first thing that spoke to me about rock and roll too, was just the feel of it. It's conveyed usually in a certain decibel level, right? It's got to be loud. And one of the first things that I was attracted to was like, wow, what is this? This is affecting me physically. I can feel my body like vibrating, and that's what he felt when he heard the electric guitar for the first time, and it just grabbed him. And I think that was so cool that, he had that experience. And I think, it's not unlike most of our experiences as musicians when we, whatever our watershed moment is, we feel whatever that is about rock and roll.
I don't know if people do that now, but when I started out, as soon as I got to the point of where I could afford like 50 watts of tube power, it was cranked. It was totally cranked.
Oh,
I don't know how my parents ever did this, but they let me play in the basement with that cranked. I don't think they could hear anything. Everything was vibrating, but I think they were supportive of it. But yeah, I mean, I played as loud as I could. You know what I mean? Yeah. Everybody did. It's like, it goes totally that loud. Well, that's how loud it's going.
Exactly.
You know I mean?
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't think of doing that now.
I know, right?
But that was a huge part of like learning rock and roll and learning, feel the power.
Well, because that's what it is. I mean, that's what rock and roll is. It's this teenage rebellion, essentially. That's what fueled the birth of rock and roll, is this, it's this youth and this energy that was conveyed through this music. And my brother and I were the same way. And I don't know why my parents bought us this stuff. My brother had a full kit up in the attic, and I had my Marshall half stack 100-watt, and I cranked the fuck out of that thing. And I'm surprised they didn't kill us. It goes to 11, but yeah, and so I can totally relate.
The poor singers back then, because PA was so expensive that in your first few bands, it's like singing through whatever you could find, and they're like, "There's no way you're going to be able to hear a word you're singing."
No. Oh man. When somebody passes that has been such a woven into the fabric of rock and roll and culture, it always kind of makes me reflective about things, my own playing and just music in general. And then I revisit their material and I get re-inspired. That's another kind of cool thing about just like, and maybe appreciating artists while they're alive too, that you really haven't paid much attention to, is just go listen to their music and check it out and see if there's stuff that kind of ignites something in you. And, before because a lot of the, artists that you and I kind of are of our generation or they're getting old and they're dying. So, I think it's a good idea too, to just go out and listen to artists that you think are maybe don't have a lot of time left, and reacquaint yourself with their material. Well, as always, thanks for listening, everybody. We really appreciate it. And watch for us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and we are on the Ruinous Media Network, which we're proud to say now, with a bunch of other great podcasts and content creators too. So until next time.
Adios.